I think the final message that's coming from me is that we have a lot more tools in our tool bag than we think we. And we've got a very long history of thinking that we have to wait for people in authority to do the things that need to get done to fix things. And what we're finding out over the last 30 to 40 years is that's not happening, or it's certainly not happening quickly enough to save our planet and to save ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to get a handle on this, we need to start mobilizing locally, regionally, and at the state and country level, but also across borders and globally. And we need to start connecting with each other on different levels and not leaning as heavily into implementing organizations that we've been entrusting to solve problems that they're not incentivized to solve.
Good morning and welcome to the Kreashon Podcast, where we discuss how we can live more in harmony with each other and with the planet, and give you tools and tricks based on what we are doing now in our respective fields. Today I have Shannon Dobbs with me. Welcome, Shannon.
Welcome. Good morning.
So we actually already started talking a little bit about food and projects that we're doing respectively. But I want to give you a proper moment to introduce yourself and what it is that you do.
Okay. So I am a food justice advocate. A volunteer. I sold my businesses. I used to run nightclubs up in northern Nevada here in the United States. And before that, I was in the Army for about 11 years. And so I've had a lot of transitions in my life and been in a lot of jobs and been exposed to a lot of situations. And while I was going through the process of figuring out my business, I noticed and I started to get an understanding of food security issues and the communities that I was serving.
Yeah.
And so I started basically trying to do something about it. I founded a nonprofit organization in 2016 to get a grocery store into downtown Reno where I was running my businesses, and got face stomped by the administrations in the area that didn't want to see nonprofit groceries started. It was interfering with some schemes that were going on in the region, and so
Right.
we actually got to about halfway built with a grocery store, and then we got shut down. And I ended up in Mexico in 2020 during COVID, and found out about the colonias down there and how they were using downstream interventions or upstream interventions with their water system to because in Mexico you can't drink the water because the pipes are so old and they've got contaminants in them. And so these colonias figured out, if we go upstream just to north, like upstream of our neighborhood, we can put a filtration system, and then everything downstream of that is protected.
Yeah.
And that situation inspired me so much that I started looking at the food system in the same way. And I started identifying upstream interventions that would allow us to have cascading impact downstream.
That is really interesting. And you said communities that you serve. So next to Mexico and the other community that you mentioned, what other communities have you worked with?
So I'm in Colorado now. And so for the last 4 years, I've been getting back into advocacy and meeting people and having conversations and really trying to connect dots between this organization and these resources and trying to figure out how do we apply the strategies that I've been identifying to our local situation. And so I've pointed out there's specific things that are happening around the world right now that we all need to be paying a lot of attention to, because if we're able to replicate and scale these solutions that are developing, these are things that can really change the game for food security and for climate resilience.
Yeah.
And that's the challenges we're not talking about them enough.
And what would be some of these things that we have to be talking about? If you can,
there's
a bit more detail.
Yeah, sure. So there's two that really resonate with with the Caribbean, and I'm having active conversations with an America's Council that's loosely tied to the UN right now about getting strategies down into that area so that the island's residents can start figuring out how to utilize scarce food resources, how to reduce water usage on irrigation for crops. The specific strategies, there's a an initiative that got started in 2016, the same year that I started my nonprofit up in Northern Nevada. Las Vegas was figuring out how to rescue convention meals from buffets from the major hotels. And so they found this strategy using a piece of equipment that's been in the factory manufacturing a food site since the 1930s. This stuff's been around forever. It's not.
Wow.
But they figured out how to put it on the other side of the food system and be able to rapidly transition pothole prepared meals from 160 degrees and above down to refrigerated or frozen, so that they could then transition it back into the community and redistribute it, through their network. And so the food bank in the area figured it out. It was kind of an accident. They moved into a new building, had some equipment, and somebody was like, "Hey, I know what this is." And then they collaborated with the MGM Grand Resort, and the two of them together figured out over a few years how to kind of create the system that would allow them to get that food back into the community. And so one of the things that I'm working on doing is now applying that equipment and that strategy that they developed to agricultural uses, to tourism, to urban food rescue at the grassroots level, because you don't necessarily have to have your own commercial kitchen. You can borrow a church, you can borrow a Kiwanis club, you can borrow there's commercial kitchens all over the place that only get utilized once a week or even once a month.
Yeah.
And so adding this specific piece of equipment now opens the door to be able to capture and repurpose an entire category of food that we've never been able to get our hands on before. So I think that's huge.
And so to understand what you do, it's not only from agriculture as in planting and getting more crops out, but it's actually saving the food that is now being thrown out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Where you live, it takes a lot of money and a lot of resources to get food onto the island.
Yeah.
And the sad tragedy of our system is that 40% of that food gets thrown away every year. And so if we care about our resources, and if some corporation is spending all of this money and all of these resources and all of this energy and all of this talent to be able to create prepared meals, and let's say it's coming in on a cruise ship, or let's say it's coming in a resort hotel or a private plane, there's all kinds of different sources for food. That if we had a negotiation, if we had an agreement in place where, hey, at the end of your meal, if you don't eat all that food and it doesn't all go up to the public, we can take that, we can rapidly freeze it, we can reportion it, we can send it back out with families, we can take it over to the church and do a feeding. So there's a lot of different ways that we can distribute it. The trick is to be able to get it from prepared, from ready to eat, back down to storage temperature.
Right.
And you got to do that. You have to do that very quickly, because if you take too much time, it'll grow bacteria and it's not safe to eat anymore. That's been the challenge.
Okay. That's good to know, I think, because a lot of times when we talk about like wasting of food, we just go, well, it's being thrown out, but we don't consider that it might not be safe to eat after a certain amount of time due to bacteria and these things, which is important, of course, because you don't want people to get sick either. And
exactly.
We were talking earlier, or you were talking earlier about the scheme that was going on in that particular place where you try to get the supermarket going. And as you were now talking about the saving the waste food, in the back of my mind, I thinking about the economics of it, because one side is food safety, but other side is also sometimes corporate greed, that they don't get profit or as much profit from those leftovers, so they would prefer to throw it out. And I think even in France, that was something that now there's a rule that they have to not throw out things, but I think send it to the food bank. And before they would throw it out because they can't sell it anymore because of the due date. So where I'm getting at is I'm interested to know like the economic back part for these places like hotels and cruise ships in participating in something like this and freezing the food that's left over.
Well, so you have to understand on the economic side for corporations, it's not all about just the cost of throwing the food away. There's also a PR, there's also a marketing cost. There's a public perception. There's shareholders that they have to, they have to take care of the people that control the shares of their corporation. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. And the cool thing about this is that it's a huge PR win for the community. If a company that's maybe, traditionally viewed as, maybe not necessarily tied to the community or not really working together or anything like that, if they put together a program like this where they're now connected with a community group and they're diverting their food back into the community instead of throwing it away, that's something that they can capitalize on as a marketing. They can get earned media that doesn't cost them anything, and that gives them a huge PR boost. So when people talk about the financials, I mean, there's a financial benefit as well, because it costs money to throw food away. If you have to landfill food, you have to pay for the tipping and the hauling fees to get it out of your hotel. And if you've got a collaboration going with the community group that's coming and collecting that food, that's food that you don't have to pay to throw away.
Yeah.
And so when I was running my bars up in Northern Nevada, the very first thing that I did in 2006 when I took the bar over is I went around and counted all the light bulbs in the place, because I noticed that they were all incandescent bulbs. And then I ran calculations of how much energy I would save by replacing them with LEDs. And I went around and bought LED bulbs, and I replaced every single, there was 72 bulbs in the building.
Yeah.
And over the course of 11 years that I owned that business, I put over $15,000 in my pocket.
Just by changing the lights.
Yeah, just by changing the light bulbs. That was one small move. And so coming over here to the food system, every time we're able to salvage food that doesn't go in the landfill and it doesn't have to go to compost, because compost is that's the big game, right? Is like, we're going to take it and we're going to go compost it, or maybe we'll feed it to pigs and it'll come back to humans in the next cycle. But that's kind of a BS argument, because if we can rescue that food before it hits the ground, before it becomes inedible, now we don't have to go through another cycle, and we don't have to go through another upcycle of markups either. Because every time food comes to your area, it gets marked up. It gets marked up by the producer, by the aggregator, by the processor, by the wholesaler, by the retailer. Everybody puts
it's a piece of the pie. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a way that we can avoid wasting all of those resources that have been put into getting the food in front of you. And now that at least the community can benefit from that directly. And they can benefit from the chefs that have put their love into the food. They can benefit from, the safety mechanisms that the hotel or the cruise ship have employed to be able to keep their passengers safe. Now it can keep the customers, and your public safe back in town as well. And I just think it's an elegant way to close that loop.
Yeah, but I was thinking, as you said, about the composting, that there are surely still some things that are going to be composted in that cycle.
Yeah,
like I'm just saying, like the word is coming in Dutch. It's like is it the rind? The peel. Yeah, can you compost those type of things then?
You can, and that's actually where the other big technology that I want to talk about, because we're all used to composting, and composting is a very specific strategy. You put the food in a pile and you aerate it and you turn it over every once in a while, and maybe it sets fire. Every once in a while, compost piles start burning because it's an anaerobic process and you're actually applying heat internally. And what's crazy about that is about 60 to 70% of that pile goes away by the time it becomes compost. So you actually lose 70% of the food through the composting process. There's an ag tech company out of Australia that figured out how to use this special type of bacteria that uses photosynthesis just like a plant does, but it creates water.
Okay.
Through photosynthesis. And if you apply this bacteria to food waste, agricultural waste, cut trees, any biomatter at all, and then you put it in a pile in a certain way, it'll process over to high quality topsoil in a 6-month period with no loss of matter. So instead of being 100% or dropping it down to 30%, it stays up at 100% or even more than 100% because it adds more water into it. And then when you put it down on degraded soil, it actually inoculates the soil and and revitalizes the soil.
Right. And I was thinking today, first of all, like I just got into composting. So now like, yeah, it's not the best thing to do.
Keep doing what you're doing, because the challenge with humus soil is that you have to bring in tractors, you have to bring in specialized equipment to make this happen. But it is a potential replacement for composting. And the cool thing is that if islands start taking advantage of this and start getting, the cut trees, start getting the agricultural waste, start getting the cow manure, whatever you've got going on your island, if you start putting this into piles instead of taking it to compost, you can actually grow water on the island. Like that's kind of the crazy thing.
Yeah, and we need water. And actually, because the method of composting that I've been taught is called bokashi, which is a Japanese style composting. And it gives you, it's not, I think, the same water as the one that you're explaining, but it is a liquid that you then pour onto your soil as like vitamin. And at the end, you still, because it's essentially being fermented, those food rest, and you still have the matter pretty much intact. And I've been kind of burying those matter into soil for that soil to then just get more nutrient rich. So yeah, that's it's reminding me of that, but it's still on a bigger scale, I think, what you're explaining.
I've seen the Japanese doing bokashi at scale. Like they're doing it in Japan at an industrial scale and doing a great job of it. So this is just one more tool in the tool belt, but it's one that I think is particularly interesting because it also reduces irrigation needs by 30 to 50%.
Yeah, no, definitely. Can you remind me what the name is again of that system?
It's called humus soil. It's there's a company called BRM Biologic out of Australia that produced it. They own the patents to the process.
Okay, humus soil. Yeah, that I think that would make so much sense for the Caribbean, because water is one of the biggest issues that we have. Is access to a source of water, first of all, and for us. On Bonaire, a lot of, I think at least half of the island is like the ground is coral based. So once you drill, you'll get into salt water right away, and you can't really use that water unless you have like the whole desalination process, which is expensive.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so this would be a great solution for us to implement in that sense. And we would have goat manure, probably, though, not
there you go.
A cow.
Yeah. And what's really cool is because the Caribbean islands are kind of close to each other, if you had this set up to where it could be like the tractors and the equipment that's needed could be taken onto a transport ship, that you can move the equipment between the island from Trinidad to Tobago to Benara to, just wherever, and move it around in a cycle and only have to purchase the equipment once. So there's an opportunity for us to create what I'm terming as a coalition to bring equipment together and really start putting it together as a collective action instead of all of us trying to do our own little thing in our little corners.
That actually is one of my dreams, that the Caribbean can collaborate like that. We can inter-islandly collaborate more for things like food. And just like if, for example, Curacao is planting bananas and we are planting pumpkins or something, and that we can switch. A lot of times, the issue that we have is, of course, a lot of the islands are, even though people don't like to hear, we are still kind of colonized in a sense. Us in the Dutch Caribbean were colonized by the Dutch. So there are certain trade agreements between the islands and the Dutch. That's again one of those schemes where it would be difficult to break through. But I think if you say, okay, we're going to plant our own things, but we're just sharing equipment, that it might be easier to get things going than actually have new trade agreement with, for example, Trinidad or one of the other islands that
Yeah.
are either independent or colonized by another country entirely. So, yeah.
Well, and it's an important point too, because right where food becomes waste, because there's no designator. You don't have a little sign in it saying it's waste now. So we have to decide as a community when that becomes waste, and so the point where it stops being valuable to a corporation or to a company, that's the opportunity that we have for the community to step up and say, okay, we'll take it from here. And so this is an opportunity for communities to really step in between the trade agreement. So instead of growing things and instead of creating products like we're used to creating products, like we're going to grow it from the ground and then we're going to put it in the market, what we're doing is approaching this as a service and saying, hey, you farm over here, you ranch over here, do grass clippings from the municipal parks over here. Everybody's got their own thing going on. You're the fire service over there. You're doing your thing. Whenever you need our services, we can show up. We'll create a pile. We'll go through the process, and then we'll leave. And then 6 months later, we come back and we collect topsoil, or maybe we sell that to you, and now you have both the waste mitigation and the topsoil for next year's crop.
Right. Yeah.
It's such a smart circular system.
And topsoil is something that we import. So if we can create that here locally, that would be much more sustainable than getting topsoil. I think I've seen topsoil from like the Middle East, like what?
Yeah, we want to produce it here, but we don't have the mechanism like that. That's the transition process. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
And so now if we have these tools in place, so that's the big thing that I want to talk about, is that the tools are accessible. They're not that hard to get. We're scheming on how to get them down in the Caribbean right now. And the more people that we're able to talk to, and the more experts and the more community leaders we're able to bring together around this table so that we can collectively have this conversation, that's going to help. And crazy is that's also going to help me here in the United States, because what I'm dealing with is I'm in an area. It's a really corrupt system.
Yeah,
it's such a corrupt system. And you talked about corporations, but nonprofits are corporations too. And so what I've been running up against for the last decade is the nonprofit sector is kind of allergic to anything that's going to solve the problems that they depend on.
Right.
And so what they're doing is they're throwing roadblocks in place, and they're trying to stop, and they're even throwing suppression stuff out in the community, and like anything they can do to stop these conversations from happening.
Yeah.
And so getting out here and having podcasts with folks and talking this out, this is my way of resisting.
Yeah, but we have to resist. And I completely agree with you that because when I was in the Netherlands, I became friends with a lot of refugees, since you had the war in Syria just started. So there was like an influx of refugees from Syria. So I became friends with them. And one said that they went to Italy 1 year to help with like the refugee camp there. And that one of the leaders there was talking about this is their career. Like you would suppose that someone would want to solve the refugees, but it's how they make money. And I do think that is a flaw in, as you said, like, yes, nonprofits are corporations, but we have to do better. We have to think of a way that, okay, the intention is that we solve a problem, and we have to, if we're able to solve their problem, be able to move on to the next problem instead of being stuck to this one problem and, like, as you said, just artificially keeping it alive when there are solutions out there just for our own pocket, because then we're no better than any for-profit corporation. And what are we doing?
and realistically, it's not going to happen, because as soon as a nonprofit organization gets big enough that their administration ends up being its own class, that nonprofit organization is now part of the system. It doesn't matter what they were started for. The food bank system here in the U.S. was started back in the 1970s. And it was, with the best intention, we need to get this grocery store food back into the community.
Yeah.
But now it's very complex. The food bank system is approximately 1% of our entire gross domestic product nationally.
Wow.
It's just massive system, and it's kind of falling apart under its own weight. And it's very restricted on what it can do. Matter of fact, I was telling you about that MGM situation in Las Vegas.
Mm.
The crazy thing about that is that when COVID shut down the convention, the whole program stopped for a couple of years. And when the program started up again, the food bank pulled out. Like they said, we're not going to do it anymore. This isn't our core model. We do grocery store food. We're out of here. We're done. And the MGM brand turned around and said, all right, Matt, no problem. We're going to turn this back into a core strategy internally, and we're gonna create a food waste reduction. And they started connecting directly with the communities, and now they've got their whole system. It doesn't even have anything to do with the food.
Wow, yeah,
like that's crazy that you got a corporation stepped up to solve a problem that the nonprofits used to touch.
Right,
it blows my mind.
But yeah, it's amazing. But it's true. It's true. And yeah, in that sense, I am a bit idealistic that I wish these things could be different. But of course, I know also looking at it realistically that once, maybe we need a cap on how big a nonprofit or NGO can get.
I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to pivot towards farm. So farmer cooperatives have a lot of ability to be able to get equipment like this and start processes like this. And unlike the nonprofit sector, they've actually got a vested interest in having this equipment because this topsoil can go directly on their farms. So if they're going out and they're tapping into these corporations and they're tapping into ranches and they're tapping into all the different food waste sources and then bringing that back on the farm and saying, hey, this is good topsoil. This is going to reduce our irrigation. This is going to increase the size of our crop. This is going to create circularity mechanism. That's the groups that I'm really leaning into now. Like I've got a group of 12,000 farmers in a collective here in Colorado. I just found them last week. And it's really just digging into different areas and meeting people and getting connections and trying to figure out like who wants to have this conversation, because frankly, not everybody does.
No, of course not. And I agree with you that farmers would be the best group for this because it's like a win-win situation for them. Like you lower the cost in terms of topsoil. And I think farmers get things done because I interned for the farmers association as well when I was in the Netherlands. And they're very active and inspiring people and wanting to get things done. So even, when I look at the Caribbean, I think also like the best would be farmers as well, if you can get farmers. But look at here, we don't have as big as Farmers Corporation. We don't have a lot of professional farmers to begin with. It's not the most popular field. But there are some groups that definitely bring together and would be interested in doing something like this.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is you're on one island, and there's a tendency for us to think, oh, this is the total system.
Yeah.
But again, if we can get this equipment onto a boat and it can go in between the different islands, there's no reason why we can't just splurge on the equipment one time.
Yeah.
Get it into the region and then just move it from island to island so that we can basically set it up as a circuit. Right. So that's one of the things I'm teaching farmers is because I've got a logistics background. I was a supply sergeant in the Army. It was one of the hats I wore. And so my background is how do we get things from here to there? How do we move food safe from safe? I was a food safe certified manager for my own businesses up in Northern Nevada. So I understand food, but I don't understand it from a farming perspective. I understand it from the retail side, from the city side, and from the logistics and supply side. And like, how do we position this equipment and how do we position this strategy so that it helps us with the supply side, so that it creates these solutions on a regular or ongoing basis, and so that we as the community have control of the equipment and have control of the licensing and have control of the ability to do it. Because here's the thing, again, the corporations aren't going to do this.
The
corporations are not going to step up. Legacy composters aren't going to step up because composting is their business and they got numbers sunk into composting. So when you come to the table with something not composting, then they're going to be like, we don't care. We don't care. And so we have to have a different type of conversation about these things, about how, kind of people power. Like how can we start coming together. And I mean, this is not a new conversation. People are talking about organizing for decades, forever. But the difference is this time we can organize around a strategy that we can control the intellectual property. We can get the license, we can get the equipment, and now we've got control of something that's not stuck on a brick and mortar. It doesn't require a place. Like you have to have a place to store the equipment, but you really don't have to have like a building or anything. You just get some tractors, some tarps, a couple of water vehicles to be able to get the system set up, and then you put it together, and then you leave. And so we can do that over and over and over again. And then the blast chillers is another huge one. Community groups can step up. I figured out how to get this equipment for less than $10,000.
Wow.
So the MGS spent like probably over $1 million setting their system up over the years. But then I went back and reverse engineered their program. And it's like, you can get this equipment pretty cheap. If you already have a commercial kitchen available, you can just add this. It's the size of a refrigerator. It's not that big.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it's like mobile that you can also move that around.
Ish. They figured out how to make an entire truck of blast chiller in Las Vegas, but that's not cheap. Yeah. But the actual equipment, a blast chiller in a kitchen, less than $10,000. It's about $8,500 I can price it for. If you're a nonprofit organization, you don't even have to pay the tax. Mm-hmm. So it's just that cost. And then so crowdfunding as a community, $10,000 isn't that much money for any group to come up with. And if you start tapping in to the expats, so I lived in Mexico. Here's a trick. There's a lot of expatriates that live in country with local. And a lot of them are rich Europeans, rich Americans. They're wealthy people that have figured their stuff out. They're like, I'm going to go down and live here because it's paradise and because my dollar stretches farther and whatever. Those people actually care about the community too. They just don't understand how to support the community.
Right.
And so a lot of times, if you can reach out through the expat community and say, hey, we've got an opportunity to be able to get this food from the cruise ships, from the hotels back into the community, and you can be an integral part in how this works. You can actually crowdfund in the expat community. And a lot of times they've got funds and resources and they're looking for legacy. They're not necessarily looking for, how do I make $1 or how do I get into a business scheme or how do I, whatever. They're just looking for how do I make the community that I've called my home a better place to live.
Right.
So if you understand that psychology, a lot of times that can adjust how you approach the community group. Mm-hmm. And just go into English language Facebook group, start having conversations,
Yeah, that's. I was thinking of someone that also mentioned this. Like he came across a lot of rich people living on the island, and they just wanted to give money to do good, or like invest in community projects. But all that person was missing was like an NGO because they need to like make it official. They're not just gonna give money to someone like personally or something like that. So you do need, maybe depends on the people, but I think here with those group that he encounters, they require.
Yeah, you would have to have a nonprofit license or be a farmer collective. Mm. So if you're going to represent a group and you're saying to a bunch of farmers, hey, do you have any sort of like a collaborative? Do you have what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a collective, basically like an agreement that like we're all going to share resources, anything like that. You can probably find a few groups like that. And those, for something like this, for something that's capacity building, that's farming, that's really focused on that, I would actually step away from the nonprofit or create a nonprofit that the farmers control and have it be, they call it a nested system. So you got the farmers and then you've also got the nonprofit organization and they're just nested within each other.
Yeah.
And so organization, it's not that hard to structure these things.
Yeah. And I was going to ask about like the tractors. Let's say the islands have their own tractors. Can they use that or they need a specific type of?
There's a couple of pieces of equipment that may need to get ordered custom just because like there's this one piece of equipment that's got sprayers all the way around it. And that's the piece that inoculates the waste. It sprays the bacteria down on it. And then you got to get it mixed and then you form the pile. And so you have to be able to do that in the field.
Okay.
So, yeah. But as far as like a tractor to push waste around, like making the piles, that's easy. Everybody's got those. You can rent them by the job and then take them back.
Yeah.
Somebody's got it's not that hard to get. So really the money is in the license.
Okay.
You have to license that technology from Australia. And so you have to bring that in essentially as a business.
Mm.
So once you get your business plan together, you have the suppliers. Let's say it's fire waste mitigation. Let's say it's the municipal city. Maybe they're doing parks departments, or they're doing grass clippings, taking the palm tree leaves down, all of that other crap that ends up.
Yeah.
It's all bio waste. It can all get added in, and everything gets converted. I even heard that they threw an entire cow carcass on there one time and it converted all of it.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's heavy robust stuff. It just sounds yeah.
So with the bones and everything, that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, like you reach out and just go like this and it just crunches in powder.
Wow. And that's like collagen powder, right? Because it's also bones.
Yeah, and it's safe. There's no pests. There's no smell. There's no fire risk. Like it changes the game. And the thing is, like it's over in Asia right now. It's over in Europe right now. But down here in the Americas, we haven't quite figured this out yet.
Yeah.
And so this is the challenge is while the corporations are still figuring their stuff out and while they're kind of ignoring this opportunity, we have an opportunity as communities to step up and say, oh yeah, we'll do this. We'll take care of this. And now it changes the way, the dynamic about how we're communicating with corporations, because now we're stepping in as we're providing a service for them.
Yeah.
Now we're not asking them for help. We're providing them help, giving them something that's valuable. And now they have a reason to flow resources this way because it's a service, because it's a line item on their bottom line.
Yeah. And I think that's important, like changing that dynamic with corporations. But I think also like between us as quote unquote like citizens and like the government, that we are not only that at least that's coming from something that I see a lot here. We're very fast to mention, oh, but the government has to do this and the government has to do that. We're like and I'm like, well, maybe to some extent, but what can we do? So I think essentially that's what you're doing with your work, like asking like, okay, what can we do ourselves and not sit and wait and be dependent on whether it's like corporation or government or whatever.
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm into this stuff. Like this is my favorite thing in the world to do is entrepreneurism. And so I'm approaching this whole conversation as like, hey, if the entire island was a business owner, if all of the farmers came together and said, we want to run this as a business, what might that look like? And how can we put our hats together in the ring and say, hey, we're going to create this entity and this is who it's going to benefit and this is how we're going to flow out resources. And you can even use so one of the things that we're talking about is using blockchain and AI to be able to coordinate how waste work. And you can insert transparency and distributed governance into blockchain in a way that everybody's got, equal ownership, or everybody's got ownership, current to what they're putting into it. And you can easily flow resources back upstream to the corporations and the sources of where the materials are coming from. So that increases buy-in even more, because if the company's like, oh, not only do I not have paper waste, but you're actually going to give me a couple bucks for it.
Right.
Yeah, let's do that.
And would this be with like your own custom blockchain, or would you be using, for example, Bitcoin or something like this that already exists?
No, I would never use Bitcoin. So So Ethereum is a type of blockchain that got developed after Bitcoin, and it uses 99.98% less energy.
Mm. Yes, I know of Ethereum. You had the NFT boost a couple of years ago, and I was in there, and I learned about like all of like Ethereum, Polygon, and these different things. So so you're saying Ethereum would be the most efficient, or
So do you know about the smart contracts?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so here's what smart contracts are, and this is really exciting for me. I geek out on this. So with smart contracts, right. So you can buy and sell anything on a smart contract. You can agree to anything you want. You can purchase property on it. You can purchase equipment on it. What you can also do is you can create selective permeability in private property boundary lines. So traditionally, if you have a house and you're, the four corners of your house and your backyard and your front yard, that's yours. And so governments and nonprofit organizations, they can't go in to get data about how water flows through your house or how it flows through your backyard or any of the information. And so we're kind of blind everywhere where there's private property lines. We don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's challenges. Like if you've got a stream coming down and it goes through multiple property lines, now you've got conflicts because each one has their own kind of thing that they're trying to do. And a lot of times they conflict. Like a lot of times here in the Western United States, we got the Colorado River right here. By the time it flows down through Arizona and Nevada and California,
Right.
and Mexico doesn't get any of it. And so we've got this situation where the downstream actions affect upstream as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're starting to do is see how blockchain can create permeability in those boundary lines so that, you can still have your backyard, but let's say you've got a garden or a chicken coop or, anything like that in your backyard, and you make for food, then you can eat anything.
Yeah.
Now you have an opportunity to potentially flow those resources back out into the community and get credit for it and get reputation and get maybe trade resources with somebody else. Like I grew a ton of tomatoes this year and I'm not going to use all my tomatoes, but my neighbor's got zucchinis. Well, now we've got technology that will allow us to transparently move these resources back and forth.
Yeah.
And we can do it below the level of the market.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, I'm like a visual thinker, so I was like trying to imagine what it looks like.
I've got a couple of articles I can share with you.
Yeah, sure. And I can maybe include them also like in the description of the episode so people can look into that if they're interested. But yeah, I think that's giving me food for thought to think about.
That's all I ask.
Yeah. Because I was thinking like in this community, in my community, it would be, I think it would be relatively easy to implement the technology to make the topsoil. But we're not as technologically advanced on the island. So I'm just wondering how people will be like how they would receive that here. But yeah, that's that's like my.
So here's my recommendation. There's a guy that I just met over in Trinidad, and we're just in the very beginning stages of conversation. But this guy is in waste management, and he's in solid waste disposal. He knows his stuff, and so we're introducing this whole system to him as a catalyst for the island. And so if Panara understands, like if your neighbors and your friends and your local farmers understand that this is something that collectively is coming to the islands, then what you could do is support Trinidad and Tobago in getting this stuff, and then you guys have it also, and then the other guys down the street have it, and then you start to the point where you have your own boat, and then once you got your own boat, now you're going in between the Virgin Islands and you're going in between like everywhere.
Yeah,
it's almost like reverse piracy at this point. Like, hey, we're going to run around and fix your land for you and get rid of some waste. And like, that's what we need. That's the kind of attitude that we need. Is like, hey, you know what? We're just going to do this shit.
Yeah. I'm
tired of asking for permission.
Right.
I mean, it's all inside existing laws. Like the laws and regulations are right there. We already know what the game is. We know what the board looks like. We've all read the rules. We all know what the policies are. This stuff falls inside existing policies. So we don't have to change any rules to make it happen.
Right.
That right there is the opportunity. So I'm just planting seeds. If anybody happens to be listening to this, like this is the conversation that we're having right now. And this is the table that I'm inviting everybody to come to have this discussion.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the idea of reverse piracy. At this, I'm gonna fix your soil for you.
Yeah, we're gonna invade your land and fix your soil for you and get rid of your trash and all that stuff you're having a bear of it. I was on the Big Island in Hawaii last November. I was out there with my mom for a week, and I was talking to some locals, and they were saying that one of the biggest challenges on the island is what do we do with our waste?
Yeah.
What do we do with this? There's no place we can go. We can't bury it.
Right.
We can't put it out to sea. Like there's like, what do? Basically they're stuck burning it, and that's horrible for the environment. So we've got to figure out different solutions.
I was gonna say our landfill just in the span of a couple of months has burned where they had to evacuate the people living in the surroundings.
Yeah.
And just having that idea and thinking about who lives in the surrounding, I'm like, oh, I can talk to this person and that person about this, and I think they would be interested to see
The
what.
crazy part about that is it's the food starting the fire.
Yeah,
It's not like wood that's starting the. You would think that it's wood. No, it's the food that's starting the fire because you get that composting reaction in the
wow.
field, starts pressuring out. Now it starts embering and it's underground. And then like 6 months later, it's like, all over the place.
Yeah, and we don't really have a proper separation of materials. So if that wood starts the fire, it would also burn like plastics and other things in the pile. So yeah, it's just been dangerous in the sense for the people living there, and I don't know, really contaminating the soil. And there's like a body of water nearby, and so I was saying that body of water, like you see, like I think it was green or something weird colored stone, so you know that like all the waste is affecting the body of water, and that's a shame, especially if you have an island that your one of your main issues is water, and now you're also contaminating whatever water you have. Yeah, that's just
The crying shame. And it's an unnecessary problem. So this stuff's been around for almost a decade. They did a presentation at COP28 2 years ago. In the UAE. They have the whole international kind of like thing that they do.
Yeah.
They did a 10-minute, they did an 11-minute presentation at COP28. So this is proven. It's in 33 countries already. That's another video that I can send you. It's on YouTube. It's easy to get to. Just nobody knows the name of the company yet. So my mission is to let everybody know, hey, this stuff exists.
Yeah.
And if we can create a coalition to where we're looking this as multi-country, and I'm focused on Colorado, I'm focused on the southwestern United States, but I'm also focused down in the Caribbean, and I'm focused in South America and in Mexico. And, this is, we're dealing with global problems, and these are solutions that can be handled locally by people who live there without having to get permission from anyone.
Right.
I think that's amazing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like the idea, and I like the different methods that you explained the piracy. We're gonna have a round table of pirates here.
I'm in for that. I'll wear the hat and everything, little patch, all in it.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your work with us and giving me a lot of food for thought. And I'm definitely gonna follow up and see what we can do here on Bonaire with these technologies. And I think it will be possible to get there. It's just the how and the when and these things. But as kind of a final message to the audience, what would you like to share with them?
I think the final message that's coming from me is that we have a lot more tools in our tool bag than we think and we've got a very long history of thinking that we have to wait for people in authority to do the things that need to get done to fix things. And what we're finding out over the last 30 to 40 years is that's not happening, or it's certainly not happening quickly enough to save our planet and to save ourselves and each other. Yeah. And so if we're going to get a handle on this, we need to start mobilizing locally and regionally and at the state and country level, but also across borders and globally. And we need to start connecting with each other on different levels and not leaning as heavily into implementing organizations that we've been entrusting to solve problems that they're not incentivized to solve.
Yeah.
I think that's an important message, I think, for everybody. And if we can lean into that and lean into the fact that we have a lot more capability and a lot more capacity, and we just need to understand what the tools are. And once we understand that, I think we're going to be able to do a lot more to really fix the challenges that we're collectively dealing with.
Yeah, I think that resonates beautifully with what I'm trying to do here with Kreashon, is really give those tools. Because I know when I looked at the challenge of becoming more sustainable, not only on the island, but just globally, I said, well, I can't do it by myself. There's just no way. So how can we create more and more people that know more of these solutions, that are empowered to actually get out there and mobilize their own community and make change, and that they have the tools to also facilitate these processes. So again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this knowledge with us. And if someone wants to find your work, how can they find you?
My website is livingsys.org. That's SYS, short for systems. And the organization is Fellowship of Living Systems. I'm Shannon, and Shannon at livingsys.org will get to me. And so, yeah, if anybody wants to have a conversation, let's figure this stuff out. I regularly put articles out on my blog page on my website, including conversations about these strategies and these technologies. And so, yeah, if anybody wants to learn more, just do a deep dive. There's a lot of fascinating information. There's a lot of conversations happening around the world, and we just need to get better at moving this information around.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that note, until next time on the Kreashon Podcast. Bye.